Okay, we on?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Local Government Academy this afternoon on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Today we have a live digital webinar presentation of negotiating cable franchise services with confidence with our wonderful friends of LGA, the Cohen Law Group. Will be here today to present Mr. Dan Cohen. Before we get started with the webinar, as usual, I want to just run through a couple of our upcoming programming that's available over the next 2 months. We have some interesting events and topics and classes coming up, so bear with me for about 5 minutes and then I'll introduce Mr. Cohen. Today we're broadcasting on a format. It's YouTube Live is where we're broadcasting, and if you have an account and you're logged in, you can use the chat feature to ask questions anytime during the presentation. Dan would be happy to answer them. And if you don't have an account, no worries. Just please send your questions to gbutler@localgovernmentacademy.org, and I will be at my desk receiving those, and I will come in and ask those personally to Dan, and he will provide the answers. Quickly, Local Government Academy, we've been around for 34 years. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-advocating organization that primarily provides education for local and appointed officials. So that's where we do most of our work. We also provide internships to municipalities and other municipal organizations. We just finished up the summer internship. We had 25 of them out there. They all did a great job, and just another successful program. We also offer technical assistance to Act 47 and EIP communities. If you're one of those, please contact us and we can arrange for some assistance. And then when available, we offer grants, mini grants to municipalities to get some good work done. Currently not available, but still working on it. So in order of dates, I will not read the dates. They're at the bottom of the image there. Next week we have a regional economic symposium discussing the economic impacts of the ethane cracker plant in Beaver County. The event itself is in Washington County at W&J College. So it's a collaboration with the Center for Energy Policy and Management. This is a live event. It is free. Registration is doing very well, and there will be some speakers there from the Beaver County to talk about their opinions on the impact. And then also we will review a study done by 2 professors at W&J and they'll give us the results of their study that mirrors a study done in Louisiana. So very good session coming up. We have a webinar next week on mastering road repair and reconstruction. And this is a general overview as you prepare your budget, different ways to maintain roads and repair roads so that you're not spending more money than you have. And just some really great tips from Gateway engineers on how to look at your roads, prioritize your roads, and repair your roads. As you know, if you've been to our classes before, we have a great partnership with Sustainable Pittsburgh, and our two organizations have come together to create the Sustainable Community Development Network. A few of the classes coming up are part of the program. The first one is saving money with your portfolio manager, and it's basically using the portfolio manager software to track your energy and water usage in order to save money and save the environment. And that's a live free webinar. It lasts an hour next the week of September 26th. We partnered with Draw the Lines. That's an organization in Harrisburg that approached us about sending the message of trying to correct the gerrymandering problem or the redistricting problem that we have in Pennsylvania. And we agreed to do a presentation where we could discuss their new initiative where they develop software that all the professionals use to develop districts, congressional districts, and it gives the citizens and students of schools and everyone in Pennsylvania as a resident a chance to go into the software and create your own districts. And there will be a contest, and there will be a winner decided, and that will actually be presented in Harrisburg. So that's stay tuned for that. That's a really fun, exciting opportunity, not only to understand gerrymandering, but also how to potentially make it more equitable. Again, Community Development Network, Sustainable Community Development Network, PennSEF. It's a funding energy improvements today using money from Energy Save Tomorrow. So PennSEF is a state level program that will lend money through bond issues that will guarantee returns that will actually pay for the loan itself. So it's a great program for energy conservation. Please tune in for that and at least understand the details of the program. Zoning, we hooked up with Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs to create a zoning course. Not create, to sponsor their zoning course. It's part of the, such a long name, I always forget. Let me find it here. The Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Education Institute, I believe is what it's called. And there are continuing to get the credits for it. It's a 3-part series, 9 hours of instructions for $95. And it's being taught by 2 instructors. Very comprehensive, everything zoning. So tell your planning commissions and so forth. That's an in-person class. That'll be at the CCAC West Hills Center in Oakdale, Pennsylvania. And we haven't advertised this yet, but we're finishing up the last details of professional police operations training. As you can see, that's a 4-part series, 3 hours a night, $75 for all 4. I think that's a great price. And we're going to talk about regional policing. We're going to talk about police operations, hiring, laws that affect police, and just everything you need to know to review your current situation with your police department. And lastly, we have a community gardening in November. And this again is a little ahead of time so that in spring you can start to coordinate with your residents on how to create community gardens. It's in collaboration with Grow Pittsburgh. It's our first, well, it's not our first class, it's our first class this year with them. We're pretty excited. They're very knowledgeable and they're going to present how to do it and how you go about it and how to fund it and how to get people involved in it. So very, very good session right there. And that leads us to Dan Cohen. And there he is. Real quick, Dan, he's going to talk about governing bodies, legal rights, and he's going to talk about the Federal Cable Act, I believe, a little bit, and then definitions of gross revenues and so forth. So Dan has over 20 years experience in the field of cable, telecommunications, and broadband. He has assisted hundreds of local governments, that's hundreds, and private sector clients in these matters. So he's very knowledgeable. He serves on the board of directors of the National Association of Telecommunication Officers and Advisors. And he also served on the Pittsburgh City Council for 12 years from 1990 to 2002. Very happy to have him, Mr. Dan Cohen. There you go, Dan.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. Really appreciate it. And kudos to Local Government Academy for being a tremendous educational resource for local officials. Greg is doing a great job, and Local Government Academy, as you can see from all of those seminars that Greg just talked about, they really are providing a lot of educational tools for government officials. So today, however, we're talking about cable franchising. And the title that I've given to this webinar is Cable Franchising in an Era of Uncertainty, because that's really what is probably a dominant theme when it comes to cable franchising. And I want to kind of dive in by talking a little bit about what the uncertainty is, and then, of course, what the certain things still are, and the ways that you can benefit financially and in other ways from cable franchise renewals. For those of you that have your cable franchise agreements coming up for renewal within the next, say, 2 to 3 years, or maybe even shorter, and perhaps some of you that don't even have cable franchise agreements with your cable companies. But the reason that it's a challenging environment is, look back 10 to 15 years ago, cable companies were virtual monopolies in what we call the video market when it comes to television. There really was not much competition at all. Today, really just 10 to 15 years later, there's significant competition. One, of course, is satellite dishes, right? Dish and DirecTV. Sometimes they're referred to as DBS, or direct broadcast satellite. operators. There are what are called competitive cable companies. Usually that's telephone companies that have gotten into the cable arena. So Verizon, for example, in Pennsylvania, about 12 years ago, got into, they decided to take their old copper network and convert it to fiber, and include cable programming as part of that. So the term that you may be familiar with is FiOS. They would be a wired competitive operator. Of course, internet video streaming, and it's sometimes called over-the-top or OTT. That is certainly a huge new phenomenon, and one that is having impact on the cable industry. Primarily because of video streaming or over the top, there have been changes in the industry, both with respect to the operations of the cable companies, but also cable customers. So nationwide, there definitely have been a percentage of former cable subscribers that have cut the cord and have decided to just use internet streaming for their video entertainment, whether that's Netflix or Hulu, etc. And sometimes, I don't know if you've heard this term, but cord shavers, people who have gone from a higher level of cable programming down to the basic level and then added in, say, Hulu, Netflix, etc. We haven't seen a tremendous number. In fact, in Pennsylvania, the number of cord cutters and cord shavers has been relatively small so far, but that certainly will increase over time. So because of these changes, there definitely have been questions about what the future of cable television is. And there are also questions about how do we classify these new video services, right? Whether it's internet streaming or even traditional cable television now is really being served from an internet platform. And it is possible that a cable company will go to the FCC and say, we are not a cable company anymore. We're not offering a cable service as that's defined in the Federal Cable Act. We are an internet provider only. So that has not happened, and the FCC has not made any pronouncements when it comes to that. But it's something that could happen in the future. The other kind of big area, although it is separate from cable, it does impact cable, and that is wireless facilities and wireless programming. So you may have heard that there has been a lot of activity at both the state and federal level over how local governments can regulate wireless facilities, right? Because obviously to be able to have a wireless network, you need to have facilities. And the most recent game changer is that those facilities are going in the public rights of way. New antennas, new poles in the rights of way. We did a separate wireless seminar through the LGA a few months ago, but the reason I'm bringing it up now is that if the FCC and or the General Assembly, and there is a bill now called Bill 2564 in the House Consumer Affairs Committee, the Pennsylvania House, but if either one or both of them try to limit municipal rights and limit the fees that municipalities can charge for the use of the rights of way, then it is very possible that cable companies will cry foul and say, wait a second, we have to pay a franchise fee, and we'll get to this in a moment, for the use of the public rights of way. That's a percentage of gross revenues. Whereas the wireless companies only have to pay a few bucks to be able to get their facilities to use the public rights of way. There's an inequity here, and the cable industry very possibly could try to correct that inequity. And you can be assured they're not going to correct it by increasing fees for wireless companies, but instead decreasing fees for cable companies. So all of this creates a climate of uncertainty when it comes to cable franchising. However, there are certain things that we do know for sure. And that is that in Pennsylvania and in most other states, although not all other states, but in Pennsylvania, municipalities still control the public rights of way with respect to cable services. Secondly, that local governments do have significant power when it comes to cable operators and how to regulate cable operators, and have a lot of enforcement authority as well. And who better to illustrate that enforcement authority than Gary Cooper and High Noon? But local governments have a lot of power when it comes to cable. And there are still about 58 million cable subscribers in the US, millions certainly in Pennsylvania. But because of this uncertainty and because of the loss in customers that the cable industry has suffered, they have become more aggressive when it comes to cable franchising, and more harder to negotiate with than they were in the past. So how do you respond to this? How do you protect your municipality? How do you protect your franchise fees? Maybe even increase your franchise fees in this climate of uncertainty? Well, you got to prepare. You got to prepare in advance for franchise renewal negotiations, and you need to know what your legal rights are. So let's talk about how to do that. Okay, what's the guiding principle for our law firm when we represent local governments in cable franchising? And what we tell to our clients is municipal officials are effectively the landlords of their public rights of way, right? Cable companies use the rights of way. By the way, the public rights of way are arguably the most valuable asset that you have as a local government. And cable operators use the rights of way to install their wires and equipment and offer cable services. You, as a local government, have the legal right under federal law to get a fair return on their use of your property. That's really what it all comes down to. There are certainly many details when it comes to cable franchise renewal. We'll get into a lot of them this afternoon. But the overriding principle is cable companies are using the public rights of way. You hold those rights of way as a public trust, and you're entitled to compensation and other benefits for the use of the public rights of way. And what's the best time to be able to assert your rights and get those benefits? It's when your agreement comes up for franchise renewal. That, under federal law, that's the shining moment when you have an opportunity to get more benefits and protect your rights. Okay, so let's talk about the process of franchise renewal. The process comes from what we call the Federal Cable Act. Technically, it's the Communications Policy Act, or the Cable Communications Policy Act, which amended the Federal Communications Act, but let's call it the Cable Act. And what the Cable Act says is that prior to the renewal negotiations, what you as a municipality, or in federal law called a local franchising authority, need to do is review the cable operator's past performance and identify your future cable-related needs, okay? One is looking backward, the other one is looking forward. Looking backward, what is the cable company's past performance? How have they performed under your current franchise agreement? And usually, there are a number of things, depending on whether you're a small, medium, or large municipality, there are a number of things that you can do to look at past performance. Some of the larger municipalities do a technical audit of the cable system, for example. I didn't include that here because that's not typical. What's more typical when you review the cable company's past performance, and it doesn't matter whether it's Comcast or it's Armstrong, or whether it's Blue Ridge or Verizon or Service Electric here in Pennsylvania. The two things that you should consider doing are either a cable compliance review or a franchise fee audit. A cable compliance review is really a review of all of the major obligations of the cable company to see whether they have met those obligations. A franchise fee audit is a subset, a portion of the cable compliance review. So we're going to focus really more on the franchise fee audit. We'll focus on the money. But let me just say this, in a cable compliance review, in addition to an audit, it includes things like have there been customer service complaints about this cable operator? And how did that cable company handle those complaints? Are there build-out requirements? This is particularly true of the new cable companies, the Verizons, for example. When Verizon came into your community, if you're one of those communities, 12 years ago, and said, we want to offer cable service, many of those communities, and certainly all of our clients, said, sure, but you have to build out the entire community within a specified time frame. So if you have one of those agreements, the question when it comes to renewal is, did they do that? Did they build out the whole borough, township, city within the right time frame? Complementary services, we'll talk about this in a little bit when it comes to renewal, but has the cable company provided the free service to municipal facilities, schools, and libraries that they're required to under the agreement? If you have a PEG channel, a public education governmental channel, have they fulfilled their obligations when it comes to PEG channels? And then things like insurance and indemnification requirements. So all of that would be included in a cable compliance review, which is a kind of a larger review as to how the cable company did. But one thing for sure, even if you don't do a cable compliance review, is you really should consider doing a franchise fee audit. And the reason is that you want to ensure that your municipality has received all the franchise fee revenue that it's entitled to under your franchise agreement, under federal law, and under GAAP, under general accounting principles. And if underpayments, let's say the answer is no, that you haven't received all the franchise fee revenue you're entitled to, then to collect franchise fee underpayments before you renew the cable company's franchise. Again, it's the right time to do it because the cable company is looking to you to renew their franchise, to approve a new franchise agreement. The other thing is, even if underpayments aren't found, and we'll talk about how often that is, when underpayments, well, if an audit is done and underpayments aren't found, it still brings accountability to that franchise fee line item in your budget, right? I mean, when you look at all the line items in your budget, I'm talking about the revenue items, right? You can feel comfortable, I think, where the revenue is coming from and whether it's accurate for virtually all the other line items in your budget, whether it's taxes, fees, etc. But for franchise fees, ask yourself, do you know whether the cable company is paying you all the franchise fees they're supposed to pay you, right? And we'll get into how those payments are calculated. But my guess is you probably, unless you've done an audit, you probably don't know that. And just in terms of our firm, in the past 5 years, we've done over 150 audits, and we have found that the cable company underpaid 73% of the time. So it's worth considering. All right, so what does a franchise fee audit entail? Well, as we said, we're looking at whether the cable company has paid all the franchise fees that they're required to pay. And remember, you're allowed to assess % of the cable operator's gross revenues for cable services. Now, how do you define gross revenues? Stick with me here. There are about 27 revenue sources that comprise gross revenues, right? They include what are called, they can be divided into two categories, subscriber-based and non-subscriber-based. So subscriber-based revenues are things like all the video tiers, equipment rental, late fees, etc. All the things that the cable customer pays to the cable company, right? Hopefully not late fees, but in any event, you'd be surprised how many do. The other category of revenues is non-subscriber based. And I'll give you two examples. There are several others, but advertising, right? Every time the local car dealership advertises on the cable system, the company gets a commission, right? And you're allowed to take 5% of that. Home shopping. It's now I think it's a $4.5 billion industry nationwide. By mother was probably the biggest home shopping customer nationwide. She used to get Omaha steaks through the home shopping channel. So it's a big revenue item. And again, the cable company gets a fee or commission from the home shopping channels. You're allowed to take 5% of that. So again, there are about 27 different revenue sources. And the key question is the cable company paying on all 27 revenue sources? Well, you first have to look at the definition of gross revenues in your agreement to make sure that it encompasses all of those. It doesn't have to enumerate all of those, but at least it has to be broad enough to encompass all of those. And when you do a franchise fee audit, you'll look and see whether all of them are included. Most likely, they're not. Secondly, has the cable company allocated bundled services correctly? Okay, so let's say for simple math, let's say that you have a cable internet and phone service from, let's say, Comcast at your home, right? And let's say, again, for easy math, that each one of those services, cable, internet, and phone, costs $33.33 if you were to get them individually, right? Now we know, of course, that it's more expensive than that, but stick with me here. So if you were to buy them individually, it would cost about $100 for all three. If you bundled those, cable companies, of course, give a bundled discount. They may offer that for $69.95 or $70. So there's a $30 or 30% savings discount for bundled services. Then the question becomes, how does the cable operator assign that discount, right? Does it assign it to internet services, which are not subject to franchise fees, telephone services, which are not subject to franchise fees, or cable services, which are subject to franchise fees? So that's an important issue. It needs to be allocated equally, and that needs to be in your franchise agreement. But it's certainly the case under generally accepted accounting principles. Has the cable operator done that? Okay. And finally, has the cable operator coded all of the addresses that are assigned to your municipality, right? So you would be surprised. I mean, look, cable companies aren't built along municipal boundaries, right? So you'd be surprised how often cable companies get the municipality wrong for the addresses that they have for the subscribers that they have in their database. So what we do as part of that in the franchise fee audit is we get what's called a homes passed list, PASSED. You can't get a subscriber list because that would violate federal privacy protections, but you can get a homes passed list of all the addresses that Comcast has assigned, since we're here in the city of Pittsburgh, has assigned to the city of Pittsburgh. And we'll compare that list to the city of Pittsburgh's database, whether it's tax rolls or it's water and sewer rolls, whatever it may be, to see if there are discrepancies. And usually there are. And remember, for every customer in the city of Pittsburgh, for example, that is coded to another municipality, that's money that the city of Pittsburgh loses, right? And vice versa. So you want to make sure that you have that right. Okay, so that's just a very brief summary of what a cable franchise fee audit looks at. More likely than not, the cable operator has underpaid. And usually, if there are underpayments, it not only means that you can collect back fees, but it also means that the cable company is correcting the problem going forward. So it usually means that you get more prospective money than you otherwise would have gotten. Real quick on how a franchise fee audit, what the process is, just the steps involved. One is, what we do is we review the current franchise agreement, look at what the audit rights are, and also audit penalties, right? If there are underpayments, is there interest? Do they pay for the audit? If there are underpayments of a certain amount, pay for the actual cost of the audit. So we look at the franchise agreement first, then we send out what's called an RFID, or requests for information and documents to the cable company. Inevitably, we get no response from the cable company at first, so we have to hound the cable company representatives to provide that information. They're legally required to do that, which they eventually do. Then we perform the audit and the review of that financial information and the homes pass list, and prepare follow-up requests to the cable company to clarify or to question areas of underpayments. A second round of review is done. We then determine whether there are underpayments and draft a franchise fee audit report. If there are underpayments, we send a demand letter to the cable company. Usually the cable company will agree and pay. In some cases, they will disagree, in which case you have to, have some discussions and settle the amount that they owe your municipality. So that's really a broad overview of what the franchise fee audit is, and which is, in my judgment at least, probably the most important part of reviewing the past performance of the cable operator. Okay, remember I said you're supposed to, under the Cable Act, you're supposed to review the cable operator's past performance and identify future cable-related needs. Well, that is a less exacting task for the municipality, but you need to at least have a discussion internally as to what it is that you're looking for in franchise renewal. And that is, what are your priorities, right? Who's going to be assigned to this? Do we use an outside specialized counsel for this? And getting opinions and comments from your residents. So the Cable Act does require that there be a notice and comment before the approval of a franchise renewal agreement. So that could be done at any time. It could be done at the beginning of the process so that you hear from your citizens before you even start negotiating with the cable company, or it can be in the middle or the end of the process. That's completely up to you. So what are some of the cable-related community needs? I'm just going to mention these now. We're going to go into a little more detail when we talk about the negotiations. But the cable system itself. Are there technical problems with the cable system? Now, that includes, remember, cable and internet are fed through the same wire. So you may get complaints about slow internet service. And if so, then there could be some problems with the cable system itself, and it needs to be upgraded. Customer service needs. Have there been complaints about customer service when it comes to cable companies? I'm smiling because there are always complaints about customer service when it comes to cable companies, but you kind of want to hone in on what the specific complaints are, and you would get that primarily through the public hearing. You could certainly also do a survey of your residents. That's more expensive to do that because it involves a mailing, but you could certainly do that to have a heightened level of community engagement. Issues in the rights of way. Have there been problems when it comes to whether it's a tree falling on a wire or damage in the rights of way that hasn't been restored properly? You know what those issues are. Are there unserved areas in your community that need to be served? This is more for rural communities than it is for urban and suburban, but that could be a key priority for franchise renewal. If you have a PEG channel, and again, the word PEG comes from public education and governmental channel, what are the needs of that channel? And do we need money from the cable operator to be able to fill those needs? Those are some of the things that you would need to discuss when you're trying to identify your future cable-related needs. So that kind of covers the preparation for franchise renewal, and I included here a quote that I like from the famed Bear Bryant, who was the legendary football coach for the University of Alabama, who said, "It's not the will to win that matters. Everybody has that. It's the will to prepare to win that matters." And I think you could probably apply that to a lot of areas of your life. But when it comes to cable franchising, it's absolutely true. You need to prepare. You need to do an audit. You need to identify what your priorities are before you even sit down with the cable company. Okay, so let's say you have done all that, and now you're ready to sit down with representatives of the cable company. What are some of the major things that you wanted to negotiate for? And we've touched on a few of these as part of the preparation. Let's get into it a little bit more deeply when it comes to the actual negotiation. Okay. One is potentially increase franchise fees. Now, when I say increase franchise fees, I'm assuming for the moment a steady subscriber base in your community. That may not be the case. We can't predict what's going to happen over the next 10 years. But let's talk about franchise fees with when I say subscribers, the cable customers that you have today. So again, you can assess up to 5% of the cable operator's gross revenues for cable services derived from your municipality. You can't get franchise fees on internet services. You can't get franchise fees on telephone services, only cable services. You may, first of all, you may want to change the percentage, right? So there are many municipalities, many of our clients charge less than 5%. Many of them charge 3%. And the reason is that, remember, franchise fees are passed through to cable customers as a separate line item on their bills, right? So by far, the vast majority of our clients assess a 5% fee. Some of them don't, but you may want to revisit that issue and decide whether you want to increase your franchise fee percentage going forward. Obviously, that means more money to the municipality, but it also means more money as a pass-through to cable customers. Okay. Redefine gross revenues. We talked about how gross revenues today includes 27 different revenue sources. By the way, cable companies continue to add more and more fees. So that's not a good thing. But for local governments, our response is, it's too bad that they added that broadcast retransmission fee, for example, but we need to get 5% of it. We're entitled to that. So in franchise renewal, most likely you'd want to redefine gross revenues to be able to get the most revenue that you're entitled to. Okay. In addition to more franchise fee revenue, you also might consider negotiating for greater franchise fee accountability, right? So we discussed audits at some length. We tell our clients they should probably do an audit every 4 or 5 years. What do you do in the interim, right? How do you kind of monitor this in the interim? Well, you can at least get a sense of whether the franchise fees look like they are accurate. If you see a fall, a decrease in franchise fees, certainly that is a red flag. But you want to get line item franchise fee reports when you get franchise fee payments. And by the way, you should get those payments quarterly, not semi-annually or annually. Some of you may have old franchise agreements where you get paid literally once a year. And if so, that means you're giving the cable company the time value of your money. The most frequent the cable company will do it is quarterly. So you want to make sure that that's the case. And to require line item franchise fee reports with every franchise fee payment so that those revenues, 27 revenue sources I mentioned, it will say this is how much we, the cable company, have received under each one of those revenue categories in Butler Township, for example, right? So that you can see that they have included all 27 revenue sources, all right? And you want to look and see how strong your audit provisions are now. If they aren't strong, and if they don't have a long look-back period, by the way, and we could probably do a full half hour just on that issue. But let me say this, that we don't agree to anything less than a 5-year look-back period. Because if you are going to do an audit, you want to make sure that you can look at enough time going backwards that it's worth your while. So, there should be interest and penalties for underpayments, right? So, what I'd recommend is whether it's the current interest rate plus 3%, or sometimes many cable operators will include a penalty of 10% over the underpayment. And if the underpayment is 5% or more of your total franchise fees, then the cable company will actually pay for the cost of the audit. So those are the kinds of things I mean when I say franchise fee accountability. Okay, let's go beyond franchise fees. An upgrade of the cable system. So look at it. It depends whether you're negotiating with what we call an incumbent cable company, meaning a traditional cable company. That would be a Comcast or an Armstrong, for example, or whether you're negotiating with a newer competitive cable company. But one of the discussion points is this system current? Is it technologically current? As I mentioned before, it does have a major impact on broadband, on internet speeds as well. And if the cable company hasn't upgraded their system in, say, a decade, well, they need to do that, right? Now, there are different cable companies have different architectural structures, right? So generally, the incumbent cable companies have now fiber from the head end to nodes, but they still have copper coaxial cable from the nodes to the home. Competitive cable companies generally have fiber from the head end all the way to the home. But that's a discussion that I suggest that you have with the cable company upon franchise renewal. And if they haven't upgraded their system in a while, you can negotiate a time frame for the upgrade of the cable system, right? Now, you want to make sure that it's a time frame that works for them, right? But that can be potentially the most important aspect of cable franchise renewal. Okay, service to unserved areas. If you're in a more rural area, this could be a very important issue for you. We're negotiating now for a county in Maryland that has many areas of the county where the cable company does not have its facilities. So those are called unserved areas. And really, they have very little access to high-speed internet, right? Not to mention, of course, now with television programming, they can get satellite dishes, but it is certainly an important point for broadband service, for high-speed internet service. If that's an issue for you, the key part of the agreement is called the density provision, and that is the number of homes per mile that are required before the cable operator is required to extend the cable system, right? So it's a minimum number of homes per mile. So let's say that number is 15, right? From the end of the cable system, there needs to be 15 homes in a mile, the mile that goes beyond the current cable system, for the cable operator to be required to extend its system to those homes. Now, you may ask, well, why wouldn't they extend anyway? They want new customers. Well, look at it's all about return on investment, right? It's expensive to expand a cable system. It's expensive to run wires, attach them to the poles, etc. And different cable companies have different ROIs, different returns on investment. But it is something you can negotiate in the cable agreement. Not the return on investment formula, but what's the density number that is required before the cable company expands. Okay. Now, if the cable company pushes back and says, we're not going to agree to that number, then ask them to give you cost figures. What actually will it cost to serve this neighborhood, right? We've had some good luck when it comes to that, because when the cable company provides us with a cost estimate, often it's not as expensive as you might otherwise think, and you can negotiate a time frame for expanding the cable system to those areas. Okay, let's turn to a completely different subject, customer service standards. That's a very important issue for some municipalities, and federal law gives local governments strong authority over customer service standards. In fact, the 1992 amendment to the 1984 Cable Act was all about customer service standards, or virtually all about customer service standards. What do I mean by that? Time frames for a technician to arrive at your home. telephone answering time frames. When do you get credits for service interruptions? When do they apply late fees? That's can be an issue. Some cable operators apply late fees pretty darn early, right? 20 days after you get the bill. Well, you can, believe it or not, negotiate in a franchise agreement that has to be 30 days before you apply late fees. So it's an area that is another important area for franchise renewal negotiations. The FCC, by the way, and cable operators sometimes blur this line, the FCC does have recommendations. One, they're pretty outdated, so I think you should add to them, but they're only recommendations. They are not actually regulations that the cable operator has to comply with unless those recommendations are included in a franchise agreement. Okay. Right-of-way protections. For municipal officials who are entrusted with the management of the public rights-of-way, and we know how difficult that is because every company on earth is trying to get into those public rights-of-way, right? You got the gas company, you got the electric company, you got the telephone company, you got fiber companies, you got wireless companies. We could go on and on, all within this narrow ribbon of real estate on both sides of the streets and roads. Well, you can include right-of-way protections in a franchise agreement with a cable company. And those include the things that you would expect. Repair and replacement of damage. And by the way, it shouldn't just be public property, but it should be private property as well. If a subcontractor to a cable company chews up Mrs. Jones's lawn, then they need to restore that and do it within a specified time frame, or they're subject to monetary fines. We'll get to the monetary fines in a moment. Safety requirements. Disconnection and relocation of their wires from poles if you're doing a road widening, or especially, obviously, in cases of emergency where it has to be done very quickly. And insurance and indemnification requirements. There are other right-of-way protections as well, but those are some of the key ones. Let's take a few minutes and talk about PEG channels. Some municipalities have them, some of them don't. The Section 611 of the Cable Act says that any municipality has a legal right to a PEG channel, right? In fact, you could interpret it to mean every municipality has a right to 3 PEG channels, a public, educational, and governmental channel. Okay. What are those channels? Well, let's start with the government channel. That's pretty obvious. That would be a channel that could potentially show your borough council, township board, city council meetings. Some municipalities are very opposed to that. Some of them have done it for a long time. And, show the Fall Leaf Festival and show announcements of upcoming events, right? The educational channel would typically be designated over to the school district. It is the municipality's channel that they can designate over to the school district, and that can be for graduation ceremonies and, the school play, those sorts of things. The public access channel, the public channel, we could do a whole seminar on that. We're not, but that is a channel where literally any citizen can come in and do their own programming. It is it's considered a public forum under First Amendment law. So when I say anybody can talk about virtually anything, that is the case when it comes to public access channels. So again, there are some municipalities in Pennsylvania and certainly other states as well that have a long history of a robust public access channel. There are others that say, I don't want to go anywhere near that. That's a potential headache. So you can have one channel that contains all 3. You can have just a G channel or just an E channel. In any event, if you have a channel like that, you want to make sure that it's a channel that is high quality, right? So one of the biggest areas of negotiation with the cable company when it comes to PEG channels is high definition. High definition channels use more bandwidth than analog channels or even digital channels for that matter. So that can be a big negotiation, and it kind of depends on how high a priority it is for you. But other things are new return lines. Let's say you need a fiber connection between the video origination point and the cable system to be able to have live programming. Maybe you want a new return line to the public library. That could be an ask as part of renewal. And electronic menu description. So it doesn't just say, when you turn on the TV and you see the channel lineup, it doesn't just say, the Sharpsburg Borough channel. It says, Sharpsburg Borough Council meeting, or Sharpsburg Borough Fall Leaf Festival, that sort of thing. Okay, and finally, when it comes to PEG channels, to be able to get financial support for that channel from the cable company through this franchise renewal. Let me just say this, if that's something that you need for your channel, it can only be used for capital, it can't be used for operating, and you really need to have a PEG needs assessment, which is basically a report that says, this is what we want to do with our channel, this is the equipment that we need for it. Okay, so again, we're kind of doing these fairly quickly. All right, fine. Well, I guess second to last, enforcement rights. So let's say you do a great job negotiating. You get the maximum franchise fees, the other benefits that we've been talking about. You need to be able to enforce those requirements, right? This is not to cast any aspersions on the cable companies, but look unless you have enforcement rights in your contract, it's not really worth the paper it's written on, right? So you want to have practical and effective enforcement tools, and those include monetary fines. So if the cable company violates the agreement, you have to give them notice, written notice, give them 30 days to cure the violation or correct the violation. Sometimes that's extended if they need more time. But if they don't, then you can impose daily monetary fines, which legally speaking, they're called liquidated damages. A performance bond, I don't need to tell you about a performance bond because you're familiar with them, but it's good to have a performance bond in a cable franchise agreement, given that there are physical structures in the public rights of way. And in the most extreme cases, revoking the agreement. Right now, it requires a major violation and probably a series of major violations of the agreement before you would try to revoke the agreement. And under federal law, that's not so easy to do. But you want to make sure that you have that in your agreement just in case. We often get questions about length of franchise term. How long should a franchise agreement be? Well, remember I talked about the uncertainty in this industry right now. If this had been even a year ago, I would have said to you, well, municipalities want shorter terms because they usually get more money and more benefits through franchise renewal. And cable operators want longer terms because they don't want to have to go through franchise renewals too frequently. And these franchise agreements actually secure financial investment in their cable systems. They actually send these franchise agreements to their financial institutions. That's still the case with most cable companies, but there are some cable companies now that are asking for shorter terms because of the uncertainty that I talked about at the beginning of this seminar. So Verizon, for example, is now asking for 5-year terms. So things have changed for sure. What's my recommendation? Usually when we negotiate, we'll send the cable company our agreement. We'll include in there a 5-year term, and then say, if you want anything more than that, any term longer than that, then you have to make it worth our while. And usually you end up with a 10-year term. So, is there uncertainty in this field? Absolutely. There's significant uncertainty in this field. But what we've described today are the things that are your rights and potential benefits now. And uncertainty isn't necessarily a bad thing because, as Margaret Atwood said, when nothing is sure, everything is possible. So thanks so much for joining in today. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us.